Welcome back. Sometimes learning is hard. So hard that it needs to be explained to you very, very clearly.
That was a lovely segue into one of my favorite stories from when I was a teacher. I assigned my students a poem to write. It was just called a point of view poem. So they could choose any object and write from the object's point of view. So, for example, if they're writing from the point of view of a clock, they might say,
I tick and I talk.
okay.
I'm a clock.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Sure. Yeah, that would A plus job there, Steve-O. And then I asked if any students wanted to share their poems out loud, and then we would try to guess what the object was, and it was kind of a fun little game. Well, one of my students, bustles up to the front of the room, is pretty excited. He's proud of his poem, and he starts reading it. And I think it was my second year at St. John's, so this was over a decade ago. And I still remember the beginning of his poem, and it went a little something like this. I can fit into your hand, or be as long as your arm. I am the center of some cultures.
At this point, he's lost Jen. He has lost the entire class.
Listen, I remember this clear as day. I was standing in the very back of the room, and everybody else was sitting in their desks or whatever, and they start snickering, and I am trying so hard to be the freaking adult here. But it's so hard when everybody's...
So hard.
Oh my gosh. When everybody's cracking up and they're looking at me and back from me to him.
Like, are you going to stop this poem? I mean, what's happening right now?
And he just continues on, and I'm trying so hard, but I do start smiling and I start cracking up a little bit. And everybody in the class just bursts out laughing. And it was chaos. And I started tearing up. I was crying I was laughing so hard. Oh my goodness. And this poor boy, I still remember his name. He was standing up there just confused. So confused.
Yeah, why would that be funny? Why is that funny, Jen?
Because for him on that day, learning was hard.
We are Red Weather Christians.
I'm Jen.
I'm Steve. We're here working through what drives, motivates, and inspires us to act.
Whether it's a career, a religion, a family, or education, does it even make us happy?
Well, in your case, that part of education certainly made you happy.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Laughter is a powerful medicine, Steve.
That's not how that goes. The point of that story is that they had to explain to him why that seemed funny to everyone else when they were guessing what object this was. For those listening, the object he picked was a gun.
Right. And so, when you are in your own bubble and you are thinking of an object and it is a gun, and that's all you're thinking of, and you're not thinking of anything else, like, why would what he wrote be funny? He doesn't understand.
Guns aren't funny.
No, not really. No, definitely not. I don't know.
And everything that he had described did fit the description of a gun.
Right. But when the first line, I can fit in your hand or be as long as your arm.
Okay, so here's why learning is hard. Sometimes we just don't get it, and we need extra explanation, and we still might not get it, but we hope we do.
Yeah, this episode is all about the idea of maybe appreciating the opportunity to learn a hard thing in life. Is it ever not going to be funny? Steve says I have a middle school boy humor. I don't know. But I think you do too.
So if you didn't remember this about us, we are both teachers or have been teachers. And we have a lot of experience about what education is supposed to be and what learning is supposed to be and how it's supposed to work.
Yes.
But some things within education in general, the learning process, almost stymie actual learning.
Good word, Stephen.
Thanks, I learned that word.
Yes.
Not recently either. So just think about the grading system. If you go back in high school or college or whatever it was, the idea of the grading system is to give you a checkup or a mark of how much you've progressed or what you've learned.
Yes, what you've achieved.
And yet, once you achieve that on some test, assessment, whatever it is, you don't need it anymore. Not really.
Oh, I know what you mean, because when I was a student in high school, I think I started maturing a little late, because it was only in college when I started realizing, oh, hey, like I should just learn these things, not just for the grade, but for my life. But anyway, when I was in high school, it was kind of path of least resistance to get to the grade. And once I got to the grade, my brain was like, okay, now you can forget everything.
And not only do we succumb to that idea as a student, we also do it as teachers, where we compartmentalize each unit, separate it, and the students are asking me questions like, hey, am I going to need to know this on the next test? I tell them, because I teach math, everything is pretty much cumulative in math. You might not be tested exactly on linear equations when we do parabolic equations, but it's going to be helpful to know those mathematical concepts.
Just kidding. I like math, actually.
You taught it.
I did. I taught Algebra 1 year.
Whoop, whoop.
Yes.
And that isn't learning. That is just assessing and quizzing for trivial knowledge.
Yeah, and bringing this to an application for us all here, because you're like, why are they talking about education? I don't care. Well, maybe you don't care, but I think a lot of people are kind of like the students. And so you want to pause and ask yourself if you are like this or if you've been like this. You get to a point in life and you stop. So maybe you get your job, you work really hard to get your job, and then you just kind of stop learning because you got what you wanted to get. You've reached that point, and then you kind of feel like, well, I've done it, and you don't continue to learn.
Right. And in the education field, you are required, usually, to take what are called continuing education units or credits, basically college courses or professional development courses, to hone your craft. And yet, those are like a farce.
Well, that's been our experience, but not 100%. Some of them are great. But overall, I think if you were to take a teacher poll and ask them about professional development, unfortunately, I think the majority of teachers might say that it is more of a drag and not super helpful.
Or in one case at our school, former school, it was a camaraderie building event to go to a conference. Not necessarily for the conference, but to build camaraderie with the teachers you go with.
I just remember going out to lunch afterwards, and that was nice.
Right. The problem here is the teachers are not practicing what they preach. They're telling their kids to learn this subject, and the teacher themselves has stopped learning that subject because they've already arrived.
Yeah, some people. So we're just, kind of throwing this out there to assess this for yourself and just make sure that you are not this person. That's the main objective of this episode. And so what we like to see is we like to see the kind of professional development where you are really learning something. So there have been some wonderful conferences that I went to where, I take a poetry course and I come out of it energized and having learned new concepts and some new ways of teaching poetry or whatever. And that's fantastic. So not all professional development is bad.
Of course. And yet the other thing that we would want teachers, ourselves included, to do at every chance they get, if they want to instill learning and learning habits in their students, not just getting grades and test-taking habits, it's to model that behavior. So Jen, you set up something at our last school to make sure the students knew all the teachers were reading.
If you haven't caught on to this yet, I really like reading, but I think every human should read. And it gets on my nerves so badly when somebody says, oh, I don't have time to read, because that is
silly.
Categorically false.
Right. We've talked before about time-consuming behaviors and how if it's reading, maybe that's okay, but you definitely have time.
Yeah, you decide for the most part how to spend your time. And we realize, again, and want to acknowledge that the people probably who have time to listen to our little podcast live a fairly privileged life. And you do have time to read 10 minutes before you go to bed, people. So find a book, read it. Anyway, what I did was I set up a template for everybody to print out, and it just says, there's like a line at where you put your name, and then it said is reading, and then you put your name, Mrs. Knapp is reading, and then you write your book underneath that. And I just used Post-it notes because it was changing a lot. And that way you would tape it to your door of your classroom, and that way the students could always see that the teachers are reading. And some teachers participated, and of course some teachers did not. And I mean, did I judge the teachers that didn't participate?
You definitely did. It wasn't me. I made sure to read at least one book. But the other thing, as far as modeling is concerned, Jen would read the most ridiculous YA books just so she could connect with her students, to model that this is what you do. What was the one about MMA?
Oh, the fighting?
The Caged Warrior or something?
Yeah, that's exactly what it's called, Caged Warrior. It was about a teenage boy, and he was like kind of coming out of poverty, and he started like fighting, doing underground fighting to make money. Yeah, I mean, it was not my kind of book. But I will tell you this, friends, I really enjoyed Caged Warrior. It was really good.
Was it 5 stars?
It might have been. I'll have to go back and look on my Goodreads. Friend me on Goodreads. I would have never picked that book up had I not been an active teacher at the time, because I wanted to be reading all kinds of books. So, somebody comes up to me and I get to know my students, and then I can be able to recommend a book to that particular student because I've read these crazy books.
Right. Now, I wasn't reading as much as Jen, but I would go out of my way to find topics within my area, so physics or math, that I was reading. I read a really actually difficult book by Max Tegmark, like Mathematical Universe, but I was able to recommend it to a high-level senior, and he also read it.
Oh, really? Who?
Garrett.
Okay. Shout out to Garrett Van Dyke.
That might get cut.
Nah. Love you, Garrett.
We'll just talk directly to Garrett at this point.
So, Garrett, how's it going?
You're engaged now. Woohoo!
Okay, moving along. So, yeah, I think that if you are a human, you should be reading. Now, I understand that reading is not the only resource for learning, but it is one of the best resources for learning. And not only for learning, for just stimulating your brain.
Great. Well, of course, as educators, we didn't just learn about our subjects or in the classroom. That was one of the things we wanted our students to take away too. Like, it didn't stop when you left the class. And it didn't stop for us either.
Right. And I hope everyone listening is hearing that right now. You don't stop learning. It doesn't stop. And if you feel like it has, there's something wrong, and start reading a book.
Can't stop, won't stop. But what I was able to do then is I can make conversations with the students about what I'm learning outside of my subject area, which at the time that I was still teaching in the States focused a lot on financial literacy. And then I was able to impart some of those ideas that I had, although they thought I was crazy. Like, I didn't drive very often. I rode my bike to school.
I mean, earlier on, you didn't even have a cell phone.
I didn't have a cell phone because I didn't need one. Like, who am I going to call?
Your only friend is me.
Right. That's basically what it was. Like, I don't need that. We did share a cell phone for certain emergency situations if I was away or something.
Indeed.
But that allowed them to see that I wasn't stuck with just my subject matter.
Yeah. Think back to your teachers that you've had in life and try to remember the ones that were vibrant and interesting, And then also try to remember the ones that were just kind of like robotic teachers. They were just in there doing a job. I can remember both. And nobody wants to be that robot teacher or that robot human in life where you're like, I'm just doing my job, filling in the blanks.
Right. And the other thing about education and learning is that oftentimes we don't even care to learn unless there's something connecting us to that subject. And one of the ways we would do that is to connect with our students on some other level. Like we would meet them somewhere at like a game. They'd see us, would be a part of their life in some other way, and then we could connect in the classroom and spark learning. That might be more difficult as an adult outside of the classroom, but if you think about how you learn best, it's usually you have some connection to the material or the person with that material.
Right. And I think everybody listening would agree that having a decent relationship with the person teaching you the subject matter is really important and can make a huge difference.
And of course, being realistic. I knew as a math teacher that my students weren't going to use most of the concepts we talked about.
Oof.
And I was honest with them. But I tell them this all the time. There are skills you learn in math that produce critical thinking in other areas. Your ability to solve a problem and see it differently is very helpful and nourished by mathematical knowledge.
Nourished. How lovely. I had the same experience even teaching English, which you really do use a lot in the real world. But when I'm teaching them what a participial phrase is, they are kind of like, I don't see why I need to learn this. And yeah, I mean, unless they become an English major or they go on to have some kind of writing career or something like that, yeah, you might not need to know what a participial phrase is. But going back to what Steve said, the idea of learning for learning's sake and knowing that, and I would tell my students this, and if you're listening, any of my former students, you'll be like, yeah. I would tell them, like, you are forcing your brain to work. And your brain is getting smarter by learning these difficult concepts. Even if you don't end up using them in the real world, forcing your brain to learn something can be a really good thing.
Now, there are some things in life that you try to prepare for, that you try to learn before you encounter any problems. One of those things is
parenting.
Thanks.
I knew where you were going with that.
And, you know, your first-time parents, you're reading all the books. Baby-Wise, Sleep Training, What to Expect When You're Expecting, anything you can get your hands on because you have a lot more time before they're born to read these things.
Yeah. And two, you're excited. I mean, at least I was. I remember reading these books. I was like, underlining. I'm like, oh, I'm totally going to do a sleep training schedule. Never did that.
And because that's difficult, learning about it is also difficult because you have to look at two parts of this. There's the book learning you can do, and then the complete letdown of reality.
It's funny that you say letdown because that's also a breastfeeding term. Yeah, just to throw that out there. But when you actually have a baby, everything changes. I sometimes tell people who are pregnant for the first time, I'm like, go ahead and read the books, enjoy them and everything, and then toss them in the fire when the baby's born, because it's almost like that's what happens. Everybody's experience is a little bit different, and that's why people can prickle a little bit when you give them advice on how to be a good parent, because yeah, everybody's experience is really different, and especially with babies. You know, some babies love to breastfeed, some don't.
Some are colicky.
There's a lot of judgment around all of that, and it's just kind of a mess.
And so you learn in different ways. We want to recognize that specifically as a parent, that you can learn with firsthand experience what works for you, your family, your child, or you can only try to do what other people have told you or what you read in books and force the education to fit your life, as opposed to learning how your life can fit together. Also, you may learn a bunch from your first kid, how to do things, how things work, and then you have a second one.
And you throw the firstborn into the fire. No just kidding. No, that's books.
But yes, there are things that now don't work with the second one that you thought were tried and true methods.
Oh my gosh, it's like you're going insane. And this goes back to being a teacher. It's like every year you start again. It's like insanity because you have a year, you use a curriculum, you're like, hey, that worked pretty well. That's great. Then you get a new crop of students the next year. So you use the same curriculum again, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
As well. And yet, if we come back to the idea that learning is hard, it's exactly what we're saying. That not only is it hard sometimes for the student, but also for the teacher or the educator. And both are going through a learning process at the same time, maybe learning different things. But Jen, you had to modify curriculum and learn how it worked best for the next group of students.
Yeah, and that's just what you do as a teacher. So if I were to give a piece of advice, if anyone listening is in the education field, it's to get a general idea of your curriculum and then give yourself room and time within your schedule to be able to tweak, to be able to add different things, and just some time in case you don't go through the curriculum as quickly.
Now let's shift gears just slightly here. Jen has recently kind of compared parenting and teaching and learning as you go and maybe changing expectations. But let's talk about the education that needs to happen in regards to parents of students you're actively teaching.
Oh, I have a story. I have a good story. Another one. Just real quick. So as teachers, you definitely deal with the parents. And I had a parent approach me and say, hey, Mrs. Knapp, my son is struggling in your class, and I'm hoping that you will reach out and that you will give him extra help. When are you available for extra help? Because you need to support him in this. And I wouldn't say it was an aggressive message, but it was pretty assertive that she believed that it was my responsibility to give additional support outside of the classroom. And I don't have a problem if a student wants to come in during my planning period for a little while or like an extra period or whatever. So that's fine. I was like, yeah, have him come in. Well, it got to the point where I somehow found myself in a classroom with the mom and the son together. And the mom was pretty frustrated with me because her son was doing pretty poorly in my class. And so he had just failed a reading quiz on Lord of the Flies again. And so I was talking to the boy and I said, boy, insert name. I was like, did you read chapter 2? And he looks at me and he says, well, no, I didn't read. And so I kind of expected the mom at this point to say like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so sorry. Like, he's not even doing the reading. Like, he's not even doing his end of the bargain. Like, I'm sorry I even asked you to like support him because he's not even doing, the bare minimum of what's required in the class. Like, read the chapter. And then if you read the chapter and you're failing the quiz, then let's talk about that. Come in, let's figure out what's going on because something is happening where you're reading and you're not comprehending. Maybe something else is happening while you're reading, like music is playing or you're actually watching Netflix or something like that, because that was very common. They would do their homework while a movie was playing. That was happening all the time. I don't know if it still happens, probably. But he admitted in front of his mom, like, I didn't even read. I haven't read any of the book so far.
Yes. And this is where part of our job is to educate the parents on what to expect from a classroom, from me as a teacher, and the expectations we get from parents about their students or their students' abilities are wild. They're all over the place.
They are. There's no planning for it. There really isn't, because one parent is going to be angry at you. One parent is going to think you are just, godsend. It's all over the place.
And there's no way to predict even the same parent in the same year in a different scenario or a different subject. I get parents who have really high expectations based on test scores of their student in math. I get them in math, they can't do linear equations, and I say they're terrible.
Oh, Steve.
Well, I don't actually say those words. I just hand them back a failing linear equations test. Like, that's terrible.
Okay, just to clarify, he never says that to the student.
Unless they directly ask me.
Oh boy.
But when someone were to ask me like that, there's always room for learning. It's just that attempt was terrible.
Yeah. One of the main points of this episode is the idea of learning a hard thing is okay, and that we don't need to strive for a life of convenience. The science doesn't even back that up, that that's something that is a good thing for us. And yet we try really hard for the convenience. And the students do too. And I did too as a student. I tried to, path of least resistance to get to that A. Like, tell me the minimum I need to do to get the grade. And we just never want to be like that as humans.
Or parents. Mainly because we've been teachers, we are parents, we don't want to be those parents who only care about the grade. We really value our kids' learning. And it may happen at a different rate. I have really high expectations for my kids, as my mom did, for me. But I have to remind myself, Jen helps me, that I can't vicariously live through my children.
That's right.
They are doing the learning, and I am also doing the learning as what it's like from the parent's perspective.
Right.
And it's hard.
Yes, so hard. Because as humans, wherever you are in life, whether you're a parent or not, every single day you are learning more about who you are, how you function in relation to other people. And as parents, it's mostly in relation to your spouse and to your kids.
And you might ask yourself, well, what's all this learning good for anyway? When am I going to use it? I get that question almost every day in a math class. And sometimes you might get a default answer from a teacher who doesn't explain their subject well. Well, it's good to get good grades for your college admissions. That's going to help you.
Yes, college admissions and all that. But if college is not the objective,
like when you're an adult,
then why are you doing things?
Why would you learn?
I mean, maybe to get a promotion.
Maybe.
But, okay, I have a friend. Her name is Gail, and she just started a graduate program. She's in her 40s. She doesn't need to do this, but she chose to do this. Why? Is she excited to be able to have a transcript of high grades to be able to, go to another college? No. She's doing it because she's learning. She wants to put herself in a situation where she's going to have to work hard for something and learn something new.
Right. And you wouldn't really question that. You're like, oh, that's neat. Oh, it's not for me, but that's neat. The problem is it should be for everyone, not necessarily a graduate level course, but the idea that you are actively learning something new. There are things that I have on my list of things to learn how to do, like welding.
Okay, I didn't know that.
I don't know how to do that yet. I know I'll need some tools. I'll need to figure it out. I don't need to go to Tulsa Welding School. I'll just practice in the garage or wherever, not here. But the idea is you learn a new skill. Learn something, read something different, way out of your normal comfort zone. You know, it's good for us to do that.
I am reading Como Agua para Chocolate right now, and it's kicking my butt. It's difficult, and it's not even a difficult book. But in Spanish, yeah.
Well, I'll brag on myself here. I just finished a 51-page level 3 Spanish book.
What does level 3 even mean?
I don't know. I figured it was around a 4th or 5th grade level
Yes!
Spanish. Also because the story lacked a lot of depth. I'm like, whoa, it's just like a story. It's not. But I could read it. I knew what it said.
So that's not good enough then. It was too easy for you, Steve.
It took me 2 weeks.
Yes. And, we talk about learning, and it's not necessarily just brain work. Like Steve was talking about learning a skill, and that's partially working with his hands. Sorry, just coming back to that story. Moving on. I used to be a runner way, way, way back when, and then I had kids, and running was just something, I tried it a couple times. I'm like, whoa, this is awful. And I kind of decided, well, I guess I'm not going to run anymore. And then all of a sudden I turned 40. I'm like, well, I'm going to run again. And so I had to relearn that. So relearning can be a good thing too.
You did not have, just to be clear for the audience, some sort of traumatic accident where you had to learn to walk again or learn to run again. You were just...
No, learn how to run.
The habit. So we go back to, what's it all for anyway? Well, let me give you an analogy here.
Please do.
If someone were to tell you, hey, they're taking a trip to France, you'd be like, why are you going to do that? Can't you just read about it?
Obviously, you want to go to France.
And you want to experience things. You want to see new things.
Eat baguettes?
Yes, but you can eat baguettes here.
Not like the ones in France.
But that's the thing. You don't know the difference until you learn the difference. When you've experienced French butter, you want French butter. And you don't question people when they're just trying to say they're doing something for travel. And sometimes travel is just for vacation and relaxation. But lots of times you learn in that process. And put yourselves in those maybe more difficult situations of travel to learn.
Right. Like my story of when I was here in Ecuador and ordered a coconut milk and thought I was ordering it with pulp, but I accidentally used the word pulpo instead of pulpa, and pulpo means octopus. So I ordered a coconut milk with octopus.
Yeah, that lady gave Jen a really strange look and just gave her coconut milk.
And then I only realized it because Steve and I were chatting and Steve was like, I think you said the wrong word. I'm like, no. I was fine. And Steve's like, no, I'm pretty sure you said octopus.
And sometimes that's how learning works.
Learning is hard because learning is embarrassing sometimes.
Yeah. And you definitely don't necessarily look smart while you're learning.
And I don't like that. I, for one.
Jen, in her old age of about 21, did learn how to ride a skateboard.
Yes, I did. A longboard. Let's be clear. They're way easier.
Well, she wasn't doing tricks, right? She was just riding. But it still took a little time.
I wasn't popping those ollies. Hey!
No kick flips.
Do you say pop for popping an ollie? I don't know.
No kick flips is what we're saying.
Listen, what we hear a lot about what our life should be is that it should be a life of convenience. And what we're saying to you today is maybe consider that that's not what life is all about. Convenience is great, but maybe let's not strive for it. Maybe let's strive to seek out some opportunities to be in a situation where we're learning something difficult or hard.
We are Red Weather Christians.
I'm Jen.
I'm Steve. We hope you'll feel empowered to question the rules you follow.
Fear mediocrity.
And keep the conversation going.